So, this talk, after being critical of floor time earlier, I'm now going to talk about some issues and concerns about ABA programs. One of the things that last year I published a paper with Justin Leaf and Mary Jane Weiss, Tristan Smith and others, because not only does floor time have issues, but sometimes we do an ABA too. And actually I was talking to one of your colleagues here during the break about how we shouldn't just critique other people. There are things we can do better. But what I'm going to say today really applies to, it's really about good teaching. How do you know whether the instructional program, be it an ABA program or anything else, is a good one? How do you tell, if you're a parent, if you're a therapist, if you're an administrator of a program, whether what we're doing with that kid is going well and whether it's an effective and a quality program? So I'm going to talk about some of those now. And again, I'd like to thank Swedish SWABA for inviting me here. And I hope when we're done today, there's going to be a couple things that you get from this talk. First one is, can you tell other people some things that make a good ABA program? What is some of the behavior that's indicative of a good program? Some things, when you see that happening, make you worry. And I'm going to talk about something like this. These are big red flags. You see this going on in the program, you should be concerned. And I'm going to focus those in two areas. One is the behavior of the teacher. You should be able to look at that teacher and say, they're saying and doing some things that lead you to believe we have a good program, or they're doing some things that should make you concerned. And the behavior of the learner, that child. I know that I can walk in, and I've been doing this for 30 years, so I can walk into a program, and it doesn't take me very long to see, based on the behavior of that teacher and that learner, that we have a good program in place, so we have some issues that we're going to need to fix. And I'm going to talk about those. Because hopefully, it shouldn't take you 30 years, what it took me to learn some of this stuff. But to do good teaching, to do a good ABA program, there are some things, some basic sort of pieces that need to be in place. And just having ABA training is simply not enough. It's useful, it's important to have. If you don't understand basic learning principles, it's going to be harder for you to be effective. If you do, that's going to help. But the problem is we tend to train people in procedures rather than the science. So I'm going to talk about the difference between those, because a lot of times people know how to implement a procedure. When it doesn't work, they don't know why it doesn't work. Sometimes when it works, they don't know why it did work, because this is what we do with those kids. And that's a problem. We need to understand what makes those procedures work or not work so we can adjust them. And to me, it's the biggest threat to our field in the States. Dad was telling me there's 13 BCBAs here in Sweden. I live in Massachusetts. We have 1,650 roughly. I work for a company where I have 100 behavioralists who work for me, BCBAs, 7 doctoral BCBAs. So we have a lot of them. We could hire another 100 tomorrow and still not be able to serve all the children and families that need services in our state. And we have more than almost any other place in the world. So there's a real problem with the need for people who have this training. But as we train more and more people, what I'm worried about is some of that training is focused on teaching them ABA procedures rather than the science. So knowledge of the procedures is necessary, but it's not enough. People have to really understand why, when you talked about Skinner this afternoon, earlier today, one of my personal idols, he actually is from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I've actually been to his house, and I own glasses that he and his wife, every time he published a journal article or a book, he would buy a bottle of champagne, and he and his wife would sit at the dining room table and toast together. And my wife and I have those glasses, and we do that now. I'm a total Skinner nerd. So his science matters to what I do and what we do, because understanding how to make sure that a behavior you want to see more of happens more frequently and behavior you don't like really requires you to understand some basic science. And it's not difficult science. In fact, people overthink it way too much from my perspective. But if you're going to treat kids on the autism spectrum, you ought to know a little bit about autism. Knowing procedures and knowing the science isn't enough. Some of our kids learn differently than typical learners. There are some strengths that they tend to have. There's actually a sort of common term that people in the States throw out a lot. And it's one of the things that my wife and I get worked up about a lot of things. I tend to get overly passionate sometimes, but there's a phrase that I hear people say in the States that just bothers me. If you've met one kid with autism, you've met one kid with autism. As if they're all so completely different. And you, like, no, if you met one kid with autism, you met a kid who has difficulty learning language. You met a kid who doesn't attend to language and environment as well as typical learners. There's some strengths and weaknesses, that's why there are diagnostic criteria. You met a kid who probably processes visual information better than they do language. Knowing that should inform the teaching procedures that you use. So knowing something about autism is kind of important. But you also have to know something about instructional curriculum. Where are we going? Because I often go to programs where people have a set of programs that they copied out of the Me book from the 1960s or 70s, and they're doing things like touch head or touch nose. And I will say, so why are we doing that? Is autism a disorder of the inability to touch your head or touch your nose? Like, no, it's not. But like, well, it's in the curriculum, so we got to do that. So you don't know that you're trying to establish basic attending to language and responding under the control of some instruction and a history of reinforcement. You don't know, and then you don't know where to go next. Good programs have a curriculum and have trained their staff to know where they're going and why they're doing that particular skill, and when the kid gets it, what they're going to do next. Because if I don't know that, well, after we learn touch nose and touch head, then we do touch knees, right? That's the next flow in the curriculum. No! We need to know where we're going and why we're doing things, and it's really important. If you don't understand those things, but also understand instructional design, how do I set up a program so I can teach you to do that skill? Because it's not uncommon when we're teaching kids to clap hands. So our goal is for them to put this hand next to this hand and make a sound when you say clap hands, right? What if I like physical contact a lot? And if you've ever worked with a lot of kids with autism, you've had this problem. You start putting your hands on their hands to teach them to do that, and they just keep their hands together, waiting for you to push them together because they like the physical contact. And it's not that they don't have the ability to put their hands together, but as long as I don't, I get more physical contact from you, and that's highly reinforcing to me. So I don't do it. Well, how do you get this kid to put their hands together and reinforce it if they're only going to get reinforced if they stop? Well, then you've got to understand, my goal is to get this hand to come in contact with this hand. How do I arrange materials and prompting such that that occurs so that I can now give the physical contact? You've got to understand how to arrange instruction to produce the outcome and why the error is happening in the first place. That really requires you to know a little bit more. So understanding of curriculum, instructional design, and principles of behavior analysis are really necessary to have a good ABA program. If you're going to do an ABA program, but if you're going to be a good teacher, understanding what you're teaching, understanding how to teach it, and how to make sure that that learning continues, that's what you need to do to be a good teacher of anything, to be a good parent, quite frankly. But programs usually require systems. So I want to spend just a little bit of time on this. I want to get really more time on the behavior of kids and teachers. But a good ABA program, a good agency doing services, has some systems in place. And if I'm a parent or someone who's paying for those services, I want to make sure that those systems are in place, because those are the differences between a program that's likely to be quality and one that's not. And that is, do we train staff? Do we monitor outcomes? Do we have data systems of data collection so I can know? Because I want to look, if you're a parent and your kid's coming to my program, I want you to know if your kid's not learning, you can come to me. And I will know that they are or not, and where they stand and what we're doing about it. If there isn't someone monitoring that, collecting data, and accountable for outcomes, then you tend to see programs where a lot of kids don't make as much progress. But if I know, and you know, that if your kid's not making progress, you know exactly who to talk to, who's accountable and who's responsible, and that someone's going to hold them accountable if they're not, there tends to be a greater likelihood that those programs have kids making more progress. Systems matter. Somebody should be, and I say in your program, I want to be able to say, all right, who is it I talk to if this kid has gone 2 or 3 months and they haven't acquired a discrimination response? That's unacceptable to me. Somebody has to be accountable to that. What changes have you made? What procedural changes have you done to make sure that this happens? Who is the person who does that? When I was trained as a behavioralist in the 80s, I hate to say that, We had something that I was trained in called CCROD, close, continuous contact with the relevant outcome data. If you're looking at data once a month, once every, who knows, every couple of weeks, do you know whether the kid's making progress or not? How frequently are you looking at learning outcome data? That's a really important piece of a good program. Somebody in some administrative role has to be ensuring that progress is being made in reduction of problem behavior and acquisition of target skills. That evaluation matters. And if you're a parent, you should ask, how often am I going to get data about my kid's learning? How am I going to know whether this kid's making progress on those goals and objectives or not? Systems for conducting assessments. You know, even floor time has assessments, and they conduct those assessments on a periodic basis. In behavior analysis, in any teaching environment, public school, there should be ongoing assessment to determine whether or not the things we're doing are producing the learning outcomes that we have as target goals. Because we can't go back and see whether there's a problem if we don't know that there's a kid not making progress. So, when we get to individual child programs, I have a fundamental rule. When I walk into any agency, program, and I consult the programs all over the place, I walk in, how's the child doing? Because, and you know what happens in a good ABA program or a good teaching program of any kind? Kids make progress. If the kid's making progress, learning fast, moving along, we know it's probably a pretty good program. If this kid is one of those kids who, oh, he's been regressing, or we've been working in this goal for 3 months, 6 months, and he still hasn't acquired that skill, that's a huge concern. To me, that's a red flag. When I hear regression, if I've got an effective reinforcer for the skill that I'm teaching, rates of that skill should be going up, shouldn't it? Why would rates of some problem behavior go up? Well, because they're being reinforced. And adaptive behavior is not compared to the problem behavior. Why would making errors on a discrimination task happen? Well, because being wrong from the perspective of the learner is better than being right. Now, the classic thing I see in some ABA programs is something we call a correction procedure in our field. And that's one of those things that bothers me. Because like floor time, it's not a description of the procedure, it's a description of the intent of the person doing it. And if when you make an error, I say, good job. And when you get it wrong, I say, try again. What is the difference between those two responses? And that is your intent. If I'm the learner, I get 2 words, good job if I'm right, and I get 2 words, try again if I'm wrong. So if you think verbal attention is reinforcing to me, you give me the same thing whether I'm right or wrong. It doesn't really matter whether I'm right or wrong. Well, then you do a correction procedure where you physically prompt me to do the right thing, and then I do it again. If I'm doing chance responding, 50-50, it's because I don't have a different enough response for being right from being wrong, and that's why it doesn't matter what I do. And the data tell you that. Chance responding is a function of the lack of differential outcomes from the perspective of the person who's doing it. So we shouldn't have any kids who are doing chance responding. They're doing that because we've programmed the consequences for being right and wrong to be not that different. That's an us problem, not a learner problem. When I hear he can't discriminate, like, fundamentally that's just not true. I mean, I'm assuming most people here are working, I know you're working in OBM, but are working in some learning environment. The idea that you have a kid who cannot discriminate, and again, I've been doing this for a long time, I've never met that human being except for the dead kid. That kid can't. But if they're alive, they discriminate. When you put food in front of them, if they're eating the food and not the table, they're discriminating between food and non-food, aren't they? When they're walking down the hallway, if they don't start trying to walk up the walls because they can't tell the difference between walls and floors, then they can't discriminate. I haven't met that kid yet. I can always, when I look for evidence of discrimination in that learner, I will find it. It's always there. So to say they can't discriminate is not true. It might be true that in the context of your instruction, they're not demonstrating discrimination. That's a very different and very specific different problem. The inability, that's just not true. There's a problem. In good programs, when we see a problem, there's support. what happens, and this happens in the States a lot, where there's so many kids needing services that the person who's implementing doesn't have enough clinical support from a competent supervisor. And that's a problem. Because if my kid's not learning, I need to go to you and say, I need help. And if you and I can't figure it out, then there's going to be some place you can go to get help. In good programs, there's a level of support that's available for those challenged learners. Some questions that is always good to ask in terms of general questions. Are they making progress in a range of skills? A lot of our kids will make progress in certain kinds of discrimination tasks. But social language, initiation of language, adaptive and play skills, not so much. Is it because those skills, they have autism, so they can't learn those things? Or is it how we're teaching? And in my experience, it's always how we're teaching. And I'll talk about some examples as we go along. Initiation. There's no bigger red flag to me than the program where all the kid is asked to do is respond. We say, touch this, do that, give me that. Everything's a response. Even say hi, Bob. And it's an interesting thing when we teach social initiations like say hi. How we teach them is really an interesting thing. Generally speaking, people do things like say hi, Bob. Excellent. Is that an initiation? No, it's a response. In that context, I'm telling her what to say, and when is she supposed to say it? After I tell her what to say. She's not supposed to initiate. In this routine, the routine is I talk first, I tell you what to say, and then you say it. And for many of our kids, they learn that routine quite well. And then they don't say, hi Bob, as an initiation. Well, that's not what you taught. You taught responding. You got responding. Don't blame autism for that. Blame instruction. Because that very same kid, particularly if they have some language skills, and who here is working with kids on the spectrum, young kids? So you have a kid who can name a million objects, right? But doesn't initiate a lot of social language. So let me get this right. So Dag puts out the pen, he says pen. Puts out the computer, they say computer. And when I stand there, they don't say, hi Bob. Now, I hope you heard that carefully. To one stimulus in the environment, they initiate language. To another, they don't. Can this kid initiate language? Yes. We have a teaching procedure that has been very effective at establishing initiation. We just don't use it for social language. When we don't get social language, we say, well, it's really hard for kids with autism. That's BS. That's just not true. Because that same kid can name every letter, right? So you hold the letter I, he'll say I. You hold the letter U, he'll say you. And if you write the word love on a piece of paper twice and have them match love to love, you can hold it up, they'll say love. And now I can put those three visual cues in front of mom or dad, and the kid will go, I love you. At which point mom and dad give them a wonderful hug, everyone cries, it's a beautiful moment because for the first time in that kid's life, he looked at his mom and dad and said, I love you. Something they thought they would never hear in their lifetime, and you taught them to do it in 5 minutes, maybe 3. How hard is teaching social initiation for our kids? The answer is not very hard. We just don't use the procedures that establish it. And then we blame the learner, which is not supposed to be something we do. We blame instruction. So, the thesis, are rates of interfering behavior measurably decreasing? If a kid's still engaging in problem behavior, if you're a behavioralist, there's only one reason for that. And I teach in ABA programs and have graduate students, and so they know that when I say, why is a kid still doing it? The answer is one word. Because it's reinforcement. Why are they still doing it? Because it's being reinforced. So that means we haven't identified the reinforcer, provided it for some adaptive responding, and withheld it for that. That's not the kid's problem. That's ours. The whole big piece here is, are the interventions, the goals and objectives, related to core deficits of autism? Because it is really easy to do the program where everything is a visual discrimination task, a matching. People know how to do that at the tabletop. They've learned those procedures, so they do those tasks. But autism is not a disorder of the inability to match things or touch things, or even name objects. It's a disorder of social language and interactional skill deficits. If those aren't goals and objectives, then this is not a good program for a child on the autism spectrum. So I said, why is it we have a problem here? And so when I want to solve a problem, I always make sure that I look in the right place. And one of the things that people tend not to do is they look in the convenient place, not the right place. And the right place, if you're a behavior analyst, is the behavior of the therapist and the behavior of the child. If you want to find what's going wrong and why it's going wrong, you got to look in the right place. And these two pictures actually are simple visual discrimination. You've got a kid here. What is the kid doing? It's actually looking at the therapist. And so is it, what do you see here? She's trying hard to get this kid to communicate. The kid's so interested in whatever it is he's supposed to request that he's looking at other stuff. These two pictures tell you a lot about the quality of the ABA program here. When I see a kid that I have to beg to ask for things they supposedly want, they don't want it. If I ask you, please punch me in the face, you probably aren't going to say, please punch me in the face, because you don't really want to get punched in the face. So you tend not to ask for it. You might walk away from it, like he's doing. The idea that you believe he wants anything here is you and me not paying attention. People who want things, look at the thing. So I always like to say, this is an ad campaign in the States about this guy called Captain Obvious. I don't know if you've ever seen this particular thing, but this is supposed to be the world's most interesting man. But his whole big thing is he's being obvious here. Oops, I hit too many buttons. I want to be very obvious. There are things that you need to look at if you're doing a program and looking at a program. They're not hard. They are behavior. Unlike in floor time where I talked about gray area thinking, I don't know what that looks like, I don't know what you mean. Behavior, he's either doing it or not doing it. She's either doing that or not doing it. It's not hard. So, the first thing I look at is when that therapist or that child comes to the therapy session, what do they do? Because when I walk in a house, if I'm that kid's instructor, if I've been there for a while working with that kid should either be running over to me or running to wherever it is we work, because that's where reinforcement's available. If they're going, no Bob, and running to mom and grabbing their leg, reinforcement is not available to be with me. Reinforcement is available for running to mom. So I have not done a good job of developing a relationship through reinforcement with this kid for simple, easy responses so that that kid wants to spend time with me. That's one of those red flags. I see that and go, we got a reinforcement problem. I'm trying to make you do too much work for not enough reinforcement, so you don't want to spend time with me. You want to go to a place where reinforcement is available for almost no effort. And that's where you're going to go. And that's how exactly look at it. That's evidence. Behavioral, obvious, wacky in the head, you can't help but miss it. That kid's not going to be with you. They're going somewhere else. Why would I go if, I walk in your house, and every time I walk in, the first thing you do is hand me piles of money and food and beer that I like. I want to go to your house. I'm walking in the door, and I'm going to go right to wherever it is you typically give it to me. Why? Because those are things I like. But as soon as I walk in, you start saying, oh, you need to do this and do that and do that, and I'm walking away. I'm not interested. That behavior of that learner right away tells you a lot. They're avoiding you. You have a problem with amount of reinforcement, amount of work. I would say response effort and reinforcement. Those are the two things we always need to keep in our head. How much am I asking you to do? And what are you getting for it? Because if I say, raise your hand and I'll give you 1,000 Swedish kroner. Hand's going up pretty quick. If I say, what I want you to do is run around this building 117 times and I'll give you, what's the least amount of money? One kroner. But you've got to do it for the next 2 hours. Like, no thanks. Not going to do it. In both cases, I've asked you to do something for me, and I've offered reinforcement. But one, the amount of work and the amount of reinforcement, just too much work, too little reinforcement. If I do a lot less work for more reinforcement, you're going to do it. So if I understand what's reinforcing for a learner, I can get behavior, and I can start shaping it up. But I've got to be always very thoughtful about how much work I'm asked to do for how much you're going to get. when I see the person holding the thing they're trying to get the kid to, they think the kid likes, if I'm holding up 1,000 Swedish krona right here, you're looking. If the kid's not looking at the quote reinforcer, it isn't one. Stop pretending it is. It's a punch in the face. They don't really want that. If they did, they'd be looking at it. It's not hard to tell whether you've got a motivated learner, a learner who wants, because if I keep giving you 1,000 krona every time you raise your hand, you're looking at me, and as soon as you see me look in your direction, up goes the hand. You're trying to do stuff to get to reinforcement, not looking the other way, slouching under the table, which we make up, oh, well, he's distracted, he's having a tough day. No, you don't have a real reinforcer. Stop making up excuses for the fact that there's an instructional element that's missing. It's not a reinforcer. So my advice is always watch the learner. They will tell you everything. If you're a supervisor, just go in and look. You'll see it. That kid is slouching under the table. I love this in ABA therapy sessions. The kid's in the chair and all of a sudden they're doing this. The person's propping them back up. Sit up, come on, you're gonna sit up, sit up. You know what that learner is not doing? Sitting up. What are they doing? Slouching down. Why? Because it's being reinforced. Excellent. Simple. If I like physical contact, when I get the answer right on your instruction, you say, good job. When I slouch down, you physically prompt me up. If I like physical touch, what should I do? Be right or slouch down? Slouch down. You're getting that behavior not because they're distracted, they don't understand, or they're having a tough day. They're doing that because you're directly teaching them to do it. And you're providing reinforcement for doing that behavior, not the other one. Now you may think you're reinforcing the other behavior, but since it's not happening, if you understand our science, you can't claim the behavior that's not happening at all or is happening very infrequently is the one you're reinforcing. The behavior that's happening all the time at high rates, that's the one that's getting reinforced. And what we tend to do is rather than describe the thing they're doing, we say they're not doing that other thing and here's the explanations we make up to make it okay, rather than say, let's try to understand why would we see high rates of this other behavior. Which again, if you know our science, it's pretty simple. We see high rates of a particular behavior because it's being reinforced. First instruction, to me there's no better judge, or way to judge the learner's retention of learning and the instructional effectiveness of the teaching condition than the first time I say to do something. Because if you do it right away, I know I've been effective with reinforcement, the response effort is reasonable, you've retained some level of skill, this is all good. If the first thing I do when I get instruction is you do something other than the right response, well, it doesn't suggest you've learned it, and it may suggest that being wrong is being reinforced. So looking at first instructional trial is a good thing to look at, because if after I do a correction procedure you get 9 right, but you get the first one wrong, okay, all you learn is do the thing I just reinforced last, and you'll get reinforced. But that doesn't mean you understood the instruction at all. So I could have 90% of the trials right, 1 wrong, but that 1 wrong is critical. The other thing is how quickly they respond. Because I say, touch your nose, well, yeah, there we go, perfect. See how quickly he responded? If reinforcement is effective, we get fast responding. Now, sometimes I hear the lines like, well, he has a sensory or an auditory processing delay. And that might be true. It also might be completely BS, in the sense that, does everything have a delay? Because there are sometimes he responds really quickly and sometimes there's a delay. And if some stimulating environment, I say it's time for the iPad and he quickly responds, he didn't take long to process that sensory information, that auditory prompt, but the prompt to do something else, there's a delay. Well, that might be a reinforcement problem again, that to claim certain words and sounds he can hear and other words not. I don't know how many of you are neurologists and look at that, but I'm not one. So when I see a kid who responds to some auditory prompts immediately and others not, I don't presume a neurological disorder. I presume probably a learning history difference. And I think that if you're a teacher, that's the thing you should go to first. The other thing about instruction in those forms is that kid shouldn't be responding before you've actually given the instruction. And a lot of times you'll see, particularly in these kind of tabletop ABA programs where the teacher starts putting out some stimuli for a discrimination task, and before they say anything, the kid's reaching for one. What that tells me is their instruction, or their responding, is under the control of something other than your instruction. And the answer is a history of reinforcement for responding early to the visual cue rather than to the language. That's a huge problem. Not unlike the floor time complaint I had, is that we want language responding under the control of language. And if I'm going to reinforce you for anticipating and responding before that's given, I will get that. So if I see that, I know that they've essentially directly reinforced responding in the absence of the instruction. That's why the kid's still doing it. We've got to fix that. Errors there. Anticipatory responses are, to me, like one of those things that just, it's like chalk on a chalkboard, scratches. I see that, and it just bothers me because it tells me we have people who are actually reinforcing that kid when they respond before you give instruction. So you're basically reinforcing them for being wrong and not listening to instruction. They're not even waiting for instruction, and that's not going to help that kid. There are two things: the reach, grab, and take I talked about before, and you guys use a term here called scrolling, where the kid, particularly if you're using sign language, they'll do more and help and please and just hit everything possible, or say, because why would they do that? Why would a kid do one response and then another one and then the next one? It's simple, because they've been reinforced for doing so. Is that eventually if I do the right one, you're going to give me the reinforcer, so I don't need to pay attention to what you said, I just have to scroll through the range of things. Yeah. You've got someone over there who does that, right? They don't wait and just do the one, which, again, that's a problem with our instruction, not the learner. The learner does that because doing that produces reinforcement. And so we may have to back up and never reinforce 2 consecutive signs if that happens, or 2 consecutive responses. We have to back up and get 1 reinforcement. They do a couple, we don't. And so they learn not to scroll. But unless we have a competing history, we're going to continue to get that. Because for a lot of our kids, eventually, someone always pays it off. We get that. Same thing with that reach, grab, and take. I mentioned the slouching thing, but the other one that happens a lot is the kid who's sitting there, they're looking out the window or down there in every other direction. Well, the physicality of the learner matters, because you are sitting up and the hand goes right up, because that's the topography of response that produces reinforcement. That's the form of the behavior. And that matters. If other forms are occurring, they're not random. The kid who always is turned away is always being prompted back. They've learned to do that. It isn't random. That kid at that moment could also stand up, could also touch behind their back, they could also tickle their leg. They don't do any of that. They do the thing that our procedures have taught them to do. And so rather than look at those errors in an ABA program as some problem with the learner, we have to look at them as essentially a function, an outcome of our procedures. They are not accidents that they do the one thing. The classic one is, if you work with, and Doug and I were talking last night about working with kids with Asperger's syndrome. And one of the things that a lot of the kids who wind up with that label, high-functioning autism or Asperger's, is when you look at them, the first thing they do is what? You look at them and they look away. And I always ask the question, do they do that 5% of the time? Do they do that 50% of the time? Or do they do that about 90-some-odd% of the time? As soon as you look at them, they look away. They don't jump up and down. They don't, glide on the floor and start nibbling on your ankle. They turn their head to the left every time. That's a very specific topography of response. They don't look away because it actually, if you have autism, it hurts your eyes to look at people. That's not true. I've actually heard people say that. Oh, for this kid, it really hurts his eyes to make eye contact with eyes. Really? You can detect the pain that they're feeling when that happens? You're making that up. Stop it. What is true is that he looks left every time. Why would someone always do one particular response all the time in response to a particular initiative? Why would every time I look your way, would the left hand go up? Because of the history of reinforcement. Why would someone always look to the left? We tend to look at it as some sort of problem with the learner rather than an outcome of our behavior. And it's really important that we don't do that. We have to look at it as this kid has learned to look away because looking away produces reinforcement. And what do we do when a kid like that does that particular behavior? In the interest, we always do the same thing though, the kid knows. And for some people, they take their head and, you need to look at me. A lot of times they just say, you need to look at me. If that response happens all the time, what might that response be for that kid? A reinforcer, yeah. Well, you think verbal attention is a reinforcer and you give it to him when he looks away. Really, is that a hard analysis? I mean, you actually deliver verbal attention as a reinforcer for that kid. And you deliver it for looking away and wonder why he looks away and we blame Asperger's or autism or whatever rather than the effects of our instruction. And that's the thing in a good ABA program is we spend more time evaluating the effects of our instruction rather than judging the learner. He's prompt dependent. He has blah, blah, blah. He has a processing disorder. They have a transition problem. We make up excuses rather than evaluate the effects of our behavior. Don't get me started on those. I'll go off on trying to stay within our time frame. But sitting up, always look at, instead of trying to come up with an explanatory fiction, a thing you make up to make that okay, just simply say, let's describe the topography that occurs. So he reliably slides to the floor. He reliably looks to the left or right. She reliably does X. And then start. Let's do the analysis of why. So when I say, time to wash your hands, and we're doing a hand washing procedure, we're teaching them, and they've learned to do all the steps, and now you say time to wash your hands, they go to the sink and they stop. Now, a lot of places, they call this prompt dependence. That's right. So this kid actually knows what you want him to do, right? Can do it, and at that moment can either do the thing you'd like him to do that they know you'd like him to do, or something else. And they're always doing this something else. Why would that be? Because doing something else is being reinforced, which is stopping, rather than doing the skill. I mean, if you do the Skinnerian kind of analysis, the antecedent, the instruction, they understand it. No problem there. The response, the behavior, it's in their repertoire. They can do it, but they're not. What's the best explanation for that? The consequence for being right and wrong are the problem. If I stop, you're going to physically prompt me. If I do it independently, you're going to say, good job. If I like physical prompting, guess what I'm going to learn to do? I'm going to stop. Not because I'm prompt dependent. I'm going to stop because you reinforce stopping and you punish being independent. You're going to give me verbal praise, which is far less reinforcing to me than physical contact. I mentioned the discrimination errors. It's one of those things that I don't understand how there's any kid we're working with who isn't demonstrating discrimination responding really quickly. It's a strength in autism. It's not a weakness. Now, responding to instruction is only a weakness when we are not good at having differential consequences for being right or wrong. This is not a core deficit of autism is not discrimination problems. It's actually a core strength. So when we see this, this is a huge red flag that we've got a problem with our consequences for right and wrong. And usually the culprit is, if they make errors, we're going to do some sort of correction procedure or, I say, redirection. Is that a term that you guys use here in Sweden? You hear that? Is that a common? It's one of the ones that it's like a floor time term. It bothers me because what does it mean to do? Does it mean to physically prompt them? Does it mean to verbally tell them to do something else? What does it actually mean? And why don't we just say direction? Why is it re? I don't even get that. But you have to be careful about these things we do because of our intent versus what is it, the effect on the learner. Because often redirection is just a form of verbal prompting. And if we're using verbal attention as, quote, praise, and we think it's a reinforcer, then calling it redirection is misdescribing it. If we said, contingent on being right, we give you 5 words. We say, that was a good job, you got it right. Or we say, good job. And when you get it wrong, we say redirection. If we said, we give you 5 words, we say, try again and next time do this. If we actually described it technologically, we wouldn't make this mistake. But by misdescribing it, we end up making those errors. And so the other thing is, if you're looking at data, if I see high levels, rapid learning across a bunch of tasks and not much in the other, that to me is a red flag. What's going on with those programs? What's different about those? Because clearly, it's a question I like to ask, is your learner a fast learner or a slow learner? I mean, which is it? And if I take that kid and their favorite thing is a computer game or some particular toy, and I walk into their house, hold their hand, take the toy, walk up the stairs, down the hall, into a room, put it down, and bring them back to the front door, can that kid independently go get it? And the answer is almost yes, almost always yes. So you tell me these engage in a complex cognitive motor task, multi-steps, remembered it and did it independently, but they can't tell the difference between blue and red? Cut it out. That doesn't make any sense. And we need to understand that if we're not seeing rapid learning in all areas, or at least consistent rates of learning, there's probably something with our instructional program, not that this kid can't learn quickly, or can't learn at a consistent rate. So big differences in rates of learning should be a red flag that something wrong with our instructional practices. The explanation is us, not the learner. So, first day of ABA therapy with you as instructor, you walk in that door, it should be, woohoo, this is so much fun. I don't know that bearded guy, but I like doing stuff with him because he just gives me lots of stuff for almost no effort. It's fun. He's not walking in, bringing me to a table and making me do stuff, and then I only get the stuff I like if I leave him. I mean, and people do that. They do instruction, and all of the reinforcements happen when you go away from me. No, no, no. I want you to want to be running over to me and spending time with me. I give you all this free stuff because you spend time with me, in where I am, and do stuff with me. You don't get it when you leave me. When you leave me, that stuff becomes less available. Because I want you to be around me, and want to be with me and do stuff for me. It shouldn't be this. I'm going to make you do a lot, and I'm going to correct you and basically berate you and withhold reinforcement until you do the things I like. No, no, that's not how therapy is supposed to work. That's not a good teaching program. It's not a good, to use a floor time term, that isn't going to establish a relationship in the way that we'd like to have a therapeutic relationship. When I walk in that door, you come running over to me, let's go do stuff. I had a parent years ago their kid loved bacon. And she would cook bacon 2 hours before I walked in the door. And she'd have it sitting there waiting. He couldn't have it until I got there. And when I got there, he'd run to my hand, grab me, let's go. He wanted to go and do stuff for me because he would get his bacon. And that's a good use of reinforcement. I made sure he didn't have to do much, get it. He liked it. Seeing me was like the greatest thing in the world. That's what a good therapy is. We need to associate ourselves with reinforcers and not so much work that the sight of you means, oh, all the fun stuff I like to do I can't have until way later. No, you get good stuff right away for doing stuff for me because I want you to want to be with me. I want you to do stuff for me. I want you to want to do things like make vocal responses, discriminate correctly, learn stuff. But I've got to make sure I stack the deck in my favor. So that's the first thing a good teacher does, is they make sure that the amount of reinforcement that is available to that kid is high and of good quality, particularly initially, for low levels of responses. You don't have to do much. I'm going to give you all the stuff you like early on. That's how I'm going to establish my relationship with you. I come in the door, I sit and hang around you, I don't make you do anything. Now once I figure out what you like, I just start giving you that stuff. Pretty soon I can get you to do something to get it from me. But you don't like having me around because I'm not a big pain in the butt making you do all kinds of things for almost nothing. Or for things I think are reinforcing, but you don't. And the only way you get that reinforcer is you've got to get away from this table and away from me. No, that would make my therapy less effective. Why would I want to do that? So we want to be careful, because sometimes we spend a lot of time delivering quote reinforcers, good job, nice work, but our reinforcers are also reminders, correction, verbal prompting. And so if I'm going to get it whether I'm right or wrong, and it doesn't matter whether I'm right or wrong, does it? We have to be really clear. That ratio of response effort to reinforcement is the thing that is in my head for a kid all the time. When I'm doing therapy with a kid, I'm thinking I don't want them to have to do much to get good stuff from me, because I want them to want to do stuff for me. And if they're not doing stuff for me right now, and they're trying to go away, then I've been asking for too much, for not enough. That's a calculation I have to make and change. In a good ABA program, when I ask the therapist, why are you doing that skill? Why is it you having him touch his head? They know. And they say, well, it's on our curriculum. They don't know. And if you want that kid to make progress faster, then people have to know why they're doing what they're doing and where they're going. Because now that they're working on touch head, how many times does a kid have to do it before they move on? And what do they move on to? If the person doesn't know, the kid's going to be doing it right for a long period of time, and they're not going to shift to another skill because they don't know what to move to next, and you're slow in progress. And might even get to the point where you've bored them and you're not giving a lot of reinforcement for it, so they lose even that skill. So knowing where they're going matters. They'll say, when I hear the phrase, we're doing this because this addresses this particular core deficit of autism, big smile across my face. They know why they're doing it, they know where it's going. They say, I don't know, or because it's on the curriculum, I worry. And last line, because this skill prevents them, not having this skill prevents them from being able to do X, Y, or Z. That's a good answer from my perspective. We need to have this kid be able to do this because without that skill, they can't do this, they can't do that, they need to have it. In a good program, there's some visual thing that the therapist is referring to that explains what the program actually is, how we're teaching the skill. And that has a very clear, you notice in the floor time, it wasn't like to say, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to teach him to say bell. That's the instructional objective of this particular activity. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say, time for bell, and then we're going to do X, Y, and Z. Or you bring the bell, you say bell, and hand it to him. Those are very clear SD, or discriminant stimulus. The kid's response is what? No, initially their response is nothing. We say that and deliver to them. That's it. We say give it to them. Or it is, they have to say the word bell, and then they get it. Have we described? Or they have to physically do X, Y, and Z. When we say do puzzle, is it that each time we dump out the puzzle a different way, there's a different number of things they have to do, sometimes use the right hand left, sometimes the pieces are on this side. Are we teaching a routine, or are we doing a different test every time? Because if the instructional routine is really clear and consistent, you know, most of you who work with kids on the spectrum have kids who, if they have language skills, have learned to say A, B, C, D, E, F, G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, may have learned some songs, because in all of those cases, the actions and language are a routine. If I say the letters of the alphabet, letters follow the next letter reliably. Numbers go in order. There's a routine, I can predict what's next. It's always the same thing. If you sing me the song, the word comes next every time. It isn't different each time. So I can learn that. Social language doesn't work that way, which makes it hard. So if you want to learn it, you're going to have to teach it as a routine. If you want to teach other language skills, understand how you create that routine. And even putting a puzzle in. If you always land with the 3 pieces in the same order on this side, use the right hand, prompt and reinforce that, much more likely to get it than if each time you dump it out, sometimes they take it on the left side, sometimes on the right, each time it changes. The speed at which that kid will learn it will differ. So we need to be careful about what exactly the actual responses are. We need to make sure that when they're correct, we have a plan. You're going to do the same thing when they're right. We know exactly, we say, deliver reinforcement. What does that mean to do? Is it good job? Or is it tickles? Is it pick them up and fly them around the room like Superman and throw them onto the couch? What is it you're going to do and how long do you do it? Or it's just say deliver reinforcement, at which point we say go on break. For how long? We need to know. Response to incorrect skill. When they are incorrect, exactly what we do, and it should be something different from this. Learning is predicated on differential consequences. So if you raise your left hand, you get 1,000 corona. If you raise your right hand, she hits you in the back of the head. The left hand's probably going to go, but not the right hand. There should be some difference. Or you raise your left hand, you get 1,000 corona. You raise your right hand, you get 0. You get nothing. Okay. So we can have it be a neutral consequence, or something that you want to actively avoid. We can make those programmatic. I have a chart, and I don't know, how are you doing on time? 10 minutes, okay. I'm going to just show this real quickly. I will make this available. I use this at Beacon where I work, and basically I hand it out as often as I can to our staff and to programs I go to. It's a simple checklist that helps people. Here are the elements of an instructional program. Is it there, is it not there? So if you're a therapist and evaluating or a supervisor and evaluating someone's program, you can go in and watch and see if those things are there. If their kid's not learning, one of those items or more will be missing or problematic. And the more you use this, the more you understand how to structure instruction effectively for our kids. It's a really useful tool. We're on the computer.
Could we have this?
Yes, I will make it available to anybody who wants it. I'm one of those people who believes that it makes more sense to spread information than to control information. So I don't get very proprietary about it. But because it really is important that you understand how to look at and evaluate instructional programs and what pieces make more impact. Now, I'm a behavioral nerd, as I mentioned earlier, so when I hear certain terms, my radar goes off. When I hear, well, he's just having a really bad day today, he's in a bad mood. These are people who are using explanations for the problem that have nothing to do with our science. And they are what we like to call explanatory fictions. Things we make up to make it okay that it doesn't happen. You know, well, he's just not motivated today, that's a non-preferred activity, he's got a lot of anxiety. But what you're really saying is nothing about the actual behavior and nothing about us. If that kid is not learning in my class or in my home or in my program, and they're doing something, when I say time for a circle time and they drop the floor in tantrum, it's not because they're in a bad mood. It's not because they're angry. It's because there's reinforcement for dropping to the floor and not for going to circle from the perspective of that learner. And those are the variables I need to look at. So when I hear those mentalistic explanations, you know, my first thought, I got to retrain this group of people to think the way we as behavioralists think. And again, I don't mind that a psychologist does that, or other therapists, behavior analysts, you're not supposed to be doing that. So they all have the same thing in common. They don't describe anyone's actual behavior. And that's the red flag you look for when you hear those terms. And then worse, they blame the learner rather than our instruction. I just think that's mean. They are not motivated. They are prompt dependent. They're having a bad day. Nothing to do with me, I'm fine. Like, really? You're not relevant in this whole instructional condition here? And maybe there's something you could do that could make this better and change it in some way. So we need to look at those things. When they talk about reinforcement, that's a really important. I love good therapists who really understand what is and isn't reinforcing for a kid. They're often using terms or saying something to reinforce it. Well, I reinforced it. You know, we're reinforcing it. Rates aren't going up. That's actually not true then. You're delivering something, you're saying or doing something, but for that learner it isn't a reinforcement. So we deliver social praise contingent on some response. All right, our rate's going up. There, then for that response, social praise is a reinforcer. It's not for that behavior in this condition. And so so why does that kid tantrum? And you look at me and say, well, because when he drops to the floor, 2 staff tend to physically pick him up and he's reinforced by physical contact. Okay, that's a person who understands this kid. I say, well, I don't really know, and he's got a lot of anxiety about going to circle time or center or whatever it is the activity's next. That's not a really good description of what's going on there. Then there's correspondence when they know the reinforcer between things that they're trying to get higher and delivering it for that. And they don't do it when problem behavior occurs. in a lot of, particularly in the States, a lot of ABA programs, some of them pride themselves on the number of instructional trials they do, how busy they're keeping the kid. And for some kids it makes sense. If I'm like a lot of teacher engagement, then you need to keep me going, or else I'm going to make you do, I'm going to do stuff that makes you engage with me. But for other kids, the rate of learning doesn't need to be that quick. And my bias is always, are you making the decision as to how many trials, how much instruction you're doing based on learner variables or some philosophy and something else? And the thing I look at is, are they attending? Are they getting reinforcement or rates of responding going up? Is the learner initiating interaction and correct responding? Those are the things that tell you whether the structure is right for that kid. So here are the quick red flags. Are the core diagnostic features, when you look at that program, are we saying things related to teaching of social interactions, play, initiation of language? Academic tasks is not a deficit of autism. And if that's primarily what people are working on, that should trigger you some concern. It's easy to work on their strengths. People love to do that. Initiation of vocal language with kids. There are programs I've gone into where the entire time that kid only talks after they've been either some visual discrimination task or after they've been told to talk. There's not structured teaching to support initiation of social language. That's a thing that tremendously concerns me. The adult talks first is what you watch. If you just look at how many times a kid talked first before the adult, you can go in 10 minutes and see that real fast. Not once. We got a problem. Half the time. Okay, it's not so bad. When they have a problem with behavior, are we going over and explaining, there's no hitting here, that's not okay, we don't do that in this setting. As if they just understood the rule, they would never do the problem of behavior. People love to teach rules as if you have knowledge of rules, you follow them. And what I find is that most of those kids have heard that rule a million times. In fact, if you ask them if they have some language skills, what's the rule? Many of them can state it for you. So it's not that they don't know the rule, it's that they don't behave consistent with it. So if you believe that they need to know the rule to be able to follow it, and if they know the rule, they won't engage in the problem of behavior, well, the first thing you should assess is, do they know the rule? And it turns out they do. So if they already know the rule, and they don't behave consistent with it, why would our intervention be to teach them the rule? That's not the problem. But it happens over and over again. People love to explain there's no hitting. You need to apologize to Susie. Just like in floor time, I see it in ABA programs. People do make the same mistake. They use language above the learner's developmental level. And it's something you want to be really careful about, because this isn't just a floor time problem, this is an ABA problem. This is a teacher and adult, normal human being problem. We sometimes talk to kids whose language level is different than the language level we're using, and we've got to be careful about that. So, bottom line, are we on time? Perfect. Learner behavior and teacher behavior. That's what you need to do to determine whether you have a good ABA program, a good teaching program in general, a good school. You can see it in the behavior of the learner, you can see it in the behavior of the teacher. It isn't as hard to evaluate the quality of programs as many people think. We just focus on the things that actually are the important variables. So if you have any questions or want any other information, I can email it. So does SWABA have a site that you can put it up on?
Yeah.
Perfect. And we'll do that. Thank you all very much.